All right. So the main thing I would like to do is I'd like to do critiques for the project that you're working on for the T package, no matter where you're with it at this point. Just submit. I'll do it in small groups. So if you haven't got very far so far, you could be in one of the later groups. If you want to do the critique early on and then get out of here, you can do that if you want to. So we'll do it like a group of about 5 people, like I've done previously, and we'll take a look at the projects and see what you could improve on. And then also, I'd meant to introduce this, I think, on the Monday class, and I don't think I did. I think I forgot to do it. So I have opened up the discussion number 4, which is the perspective and isometric. So this, what I would like you to do is there's a template that you download. And when you download it, it might look like, if you don't look at it, because it's on a... oh, that's not true. I was going to say it's on a template layer, but I don't think it is actually. So let me download this and I'll show you. So this is an AIT file. That means that it's an Adobe Illustrator template file. When you open the file, it'll be called Untitled 1 or Untitled 5 in my case, because I've got 4 untitled files open probably. But this is the template I'm giving you. Each of these is just a box. And then remember that you could use this box as a clipping group to put your images into. So you're going to go out and I want you to find one which is a representation of 1-point perspective. So you can do this online if you want to. You can look through books if you want, but probably easier to do it online. So if you did 1-point perspective, try to find interesting examples as well. So here's some examples of 1-point perspective. All I'm asking you to do is to find an example and then copy that. So if you save the image, you could place it. If we copy it, we can place it into Illustrator as well. So if I just do Command V, when you place it in here like this, if we look in the links panel, let me close this out for a second. Sorry. Too many things open. So here's my links panel. So you can see it's placed in here. This is an embedded file, so it's I could embed it. Of course, I couldn't really embed it because I haven't saved it anywhere. But so all of the information for this is stored directly in your Illustrator file. If I send this to back, I could then make a clipping mask out of this by doing Command 7. And then if I select just the image itself, I could scale it to fit. So to select just the image by itself, by the way, I had to be on the group selection tool, because remember, if I select the group, it's going to select, sorry, if I use the selection tool, it's going to select the entire group. So I'll scale that to fit into there. So that's 1 point. This is 2-point perspective. 3-point perspective. So 3-point perspective looks like this. It oftentimes looks very exaggerated. So it oftentimes shows architectural illustrations when you see a perspective shown, but you could obviously use it for anything. It's just instead of having just those 2 points, you also have a 3rd point, because obviously if you're looking down at something, these lines are also going away from you. So in this case, this is an example of 2-point perspective actually. And then if it had a 3rd point, there would be another lines coming down here as well, going down below. So if I make a copy of one of these, Control click, copy it, paste it. I could always scale it first so that it's down to the size that I need it to be, of course. It might be a little easier actually to do that rather than to try and scale it inside the clipping group, but you can scale it whilst it's in the group. So this again needs to go behind the rectangle. So you put that behind, select the rectangle, and then do Command 7 or Object Clipping Mask Make. And I don't think I did scale it quite enough, so Actually, let me just move that over a little bit. Remember that when it's inside the clipping group, if you're on the group selection tool, oops, if I'm on the group selection tool, I can select the image by itself, but if I'm on the selection tool, it's always going to select that whole group, both the frame that it's in and the image. If you double click with this selection tool, you can actually go inside this isolation mode, and then you could move it inside there. This shows that I'm in that isolation mode up here at the top. I'm inside this clipping group. So if I want to go out of it, I can just use this arrow to toggle back out of there. This one, it looks like I scaled it too small now, actually. But anyway, so that's how you do it. I also want you to put a little description underneath here of where you found it and stuff. But that's basically it. And then you'll upload this into that discussion. You'll upload it as a JPEG. So when you upload it, remember, you go reply, and then go into here and click on this image. Sometimes people just put attach, and then I don't actually see it in here. So this one's been done correctly. We can see it within the window. But if you were to just click attach, I would just see an attachment for it. So click on this icon here and choose upload image. All right, so that's that. Does anybody have questions about that one? All right. Let me go back to the class page for a second. Oh yeah, I wanted to remind you of the tutorial. So I think I'd mentioned this on the first week of the class, but it's easy to sort of forget about this. And there's also a section in here that I think might be useful for this project. So if you go into help at the top here, there's a section called tutorials. And if you open up this tutorials, you get this discover area. Inside here, there's a section called logo and brand identity quick start. And inside there are these 6 sections for this. So what makes a great logo? Here it gives you a breakdown of what makes a logo. So not like how to do it, but the definition of what creates a good logo. So this is pretty useful. And then there is also a section here on essential techniques. So explore essential techniques for creating your best logo. So this is using like grid structures, grids and guides. So I think we looked at this earlier in the semester, where you're using the underlying grid in Illustrator as a way to create really uniform shapes. So if you open up the grid, remember that you can always modify this grid by going to guides and grid as well. So you could change it from, right now it's set here to 1.83 for some reason. I don't know why I have it set to that actually. But you could set it, by default this would be 1 inch by 8 subdivisions. But you could break it down into whatever you wanted to. And then you can draw into here. If you use the snap to grid feature, everything that you're drawing into that then is going to be consistent with that grid. So this shape is always going to be exactly 2 of those squares. And then I know that that distance is exactly the same as that distance. It helps in terms of creating those sort of consistent shapes that you might want to create in logo design. So there's a little bit more detail about that here. If you read through it, it sort of explains the idea. Draw and curve lines. It talks a little bit about the techniques of using pen tools and curving lines. Simplify your logo design process. So here it goes through the process of creating a logo. Some of these also have little videos inside there that sort of show you how to go about doing certain things. So here it's showing you how to use the shape builder tool to combine shapes together. And then here in this next one, it shows you how to subtract from with the shape builder tool. And so on. So explore this. There's a lot to learn from this section right here. So you go to help and then go to tutorials. I'm just showing you one section here, which is logo and brand identity quick start, but there's another section here for drawing and illustration quick start. So it goes through becoming a professional illustrator. So explore those yourself. There's a lot to learn in there. Okay, the other thing I wanted to go over briefly is I've put down a bunch of things that I feel like you should know by the end of the semester. So as we're getting towards the end of the semester, I'll do a little bit more of this possibly next week as well, but I'm just going to go through this fairly quickly. So where do you find the tutorials? That's what I just showed you right now. And then elements and principles of design. So remember, we talked about this a little bit earlier. I actually forgot to give you the test on this. I totally forgot to give you the test on the elements and principles of design. So I don't think that at this point in the semester I can really reintroduce it, but I would study those yourself. It's something that you can really utilize in a very practical way on a daily basis to try to make better designs. Thinking about those elements and principles. The elements, remember, are things like line, shape, color, texture, value, and format or form. So thinking about the line, if you break it down into those words, line, shape, color, texture, value, form, anything you're designing, you're always going to have to think about, like I say, that line that I've got there, is it too mechanical? Maybe it should have a little bit of texture to it. Maybe that line could be a little bit thicker. Maybe that line could be not quite so precise, or maybe it should be more precise. And then with that shape, maybe that shape should be more rounded, maybe a little bit more amorphous. By breaking it down into those little elements, it's easier for you to analyze your own work and the work of others, because you can think of it in terms of those specific aspects of the design. You can think, are the shapes working? Is the typography working? Typography is sometimes included in the elements of design. I don't usually include it because I think it's too specific to graphic design, but it is oftentimes. And then principles, remember, are things like, how do you use those elements? So balance is one aspect of that. When you're arranging the elements on the page, are they arranged so that they're symmetrical, or are they asymmetrical? It makes a difference in terms of the way that we view the information. If we have it be symmetrical, it feels very kind of stable and reassuring perhaps, and somewhat conservative. If you make it asymmetrical, it feels more dynamic and more, it has more sense of movement. Contrast is another one. I think contrast, of all of the ones, when I look at students' work, is the one where I most often have to point out the fact that there isn't enough contrast perhaps to see a piece of typography so you can read it. So look at the way that one element contrasts another element. So that could be to do with tonal value. Something black on white has a lot of contrast. Or it could be to do with scale, contrasting a really big element on a page with some smaller elements can make for a really strong design. Have an understanding of the design process. So in all design work, you're going to go through a process which usually starts off quite open and kind of maybe a little bit experimental. So you're trying to figure out what this project is, what the problem is. You're trying to generate ideas. So you do research to try to understand what the thing is, whatever it might be, whatever the assignment is. You do some research into it, study what that subject is, depending on the amount of time that you have available. And then you would also want to do some sketches to try to come up with ideas. So how you do those sketches is completely up to you. This is just a general process. Like I'd suggested before, you might these days use AI as a way to generate ideas as well. Do Google searches, look in books. There isn't a sort of easy answer to exactly how you do that. But to begin with, you're trying to find a way to get to a solution. And then gradually, as you go through this process, so after the research, we do sketches, then we do rough versions of the design that you could present to a client and say, what do you think about this? And then you would do final artwork. So almost always, it varies a little bit, of course, that process, but almost always the design process goes through that sort of gradual state of starting off open and experimental and trying out lots of things, and then gradually honing in to what the final solution can be, and then kind of tightening it up, reworking it, editing it, like if you're a writer, you go back and look at what you've done and edit it. Same thing with visual design. You look at it and make changes and edit it. You should have an understanding of the layers in Illustrator. So I don't use layers extensively in Illustrator. I quite often work with quite a small number of layers, but they're a very useful way for you to organize stuff within your file. And it's a good idea to get into the habit of working in sort of best practices, as they talk about. So where you separate things in an organized manner in your file so that it's easy for you to work with. But also, sometimes if you're working as part of a group, which is creative individuals, we often are, somebody else might need to take on this artwork and make changes to it. And so for somebody else to look at it as well, it will be useful to organize it where your layers are labeled logically and so on. Remember that if you want to move something from one layer to another, if I create a new layer in my layers panel now, let's say I wanted to move this graphic up to this next layer, we have this blue selection indicator at the end of the layer where you can drag that up like that. And then if you open up a layer, you have all of the objects as levels within that layer. So this is the reason why in Illustrator, layers aren't quite so important as they might be in Photoshop, because everything is sort of kept separate automatically by the nature of vector graphics. Bulleted and numbered lists. I actually don't remember if I showed you this, so I'm going to show you this again. I'm going to show you this. If I show it to you again, I'm sorry, but so if you wanted to create a list, and there's lots of situations obviously where you might want to do this, where it has numbers to it. Got a busy day. So if you have a list of elements and you wanted to apply numbers to them, of course you could put 1, 2, and so on, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about selecting over this and then going to type, bullets and numbering, and then choose apply numbers. And then it will create these numbers automatically like that. If I then hit return at the end of here, it'll make another number and I can continue to type. So we can continue that. You could also select over it, and in the same way, I could make it into bullets. So let me go to type, go to bullets and numbering, and then I'll apply bullets. So if I applied bullets, it would look like that. I think I'd shown you this once, but only very briefly. So can you draw symmetrically using the repeat feature? I just thought I'd show you this again because I know I only showed it you once, I think, in the class. If you draw something in Illustrator, it doesn't matter how you do it. You could be a basic shape, you could draw it with the pen tool, or you could do it with the pencil tool. And then you were to go to Object and choose Repeat. You can choose from Radial, Grid, or Mirror. So if I choose Mirror, it would have a reflection across here. I could then move that central point to a different position if I wanted to. And then if I continue drawing, I can continue to draw that symmetrically. So everything I draw now will just duplicate whatever I'm doing on that side, it'll duplicate on the other side. And the same way, if I was to change it from from mirror, I could do Object and then go to Repeat and change it to say Radial. If I did Radial, I'd get something like this. In this case, I can adjust how many of those there are that go around. I could scale them in and out with this feature here. Oh, actually, this is going to adjust how many are going around. So we can adjust that back like this. Let's bring this back to the beginning. And then with this one, I can drag them either further apart or further in. Tracing with a template layer. So on this, I just want you to make sure that people understand the idea of the template layer. We've done this a few times, I think, in the class. So this is related to the layers panel. And in the layers panel, if you wanted to trace something, remember, I think earlier in the semester, we'd done a tracing of David Bowie. And you place the image onto a template layer, right? So when you do File Place, in this dialog box that comes up when you're placing an image, we can choose Link, Template, Replace, and Show Options. We have those checkboxes. If template is checked, it places it on a special layer. You can change any layer into a template layer, of course, by double-clicking on it and checking that template checkbox right there. So somebody tell me, what is the advantage of a template layer? Why do you use it? Yeah, exactly. So there are a couple of things about it. So first of all, a template layer doesn't export, it wouldn't print. But the main advantage of a template layer is that when you're in outline mode, you can still see the photographic image that's placed on that layer. Because otherwise, if it was just placed on a regular layer, you wouldn't see the image anymore. It would just look like a box. Know a good amount of keyboard shortcuts. I wanted to point out that if you go to Edit, under Keyboard Shortcuts here, it shows you all the keyboard shortcuts in Illustrator. So here at the top it says Tools. You can choose that. You can see here it's got the selection tool is V, the direct selection tool is A, the group selection tool doesn't have a keyboard shortcut, but if you click on it, you'll notice that I could actually add a keyboard shortcut into there if I wanted to. So don't edit on the school computers, but on your own computer, if you wanted to add keyboard shortcuts in for tools that don't have a keyboard shortcut, you can actually add them into there. And then if I go to menu commands, then we've got all the various menus like Illustrator, File, Edit, Object, Type, and so on. So if I went under Type, then you've got all the keyboard shortcuts for various things to do with type. There's not many keyboard shortcuts in here, actually. So the other thing you can do to learn keyboard shortcuts is if you don't know a keyboard shortcut, but you know how to get there in the menu, when you go to the menu, if you look at what the keyboard shortcut is, and then just let go of it and apply it, because we learn it to some extent through muscle memory. By you doing that, you'll learn it better than if you just look at it and then ignore it. You know? Understand bleed and how to add it to a document. So first of all, what's the purpose of bleed?
To ensure that your colored edges get fully printed over instead of leaving white space.
Yeah, so that when they trim it, if they mistrim it very slightly, if you have the color go right to the exactly where the edge is, and they mistrim it, say, by a 1/16 of an inch, you'll get like a 1/16 of an inch white gap along the edge of the poster or whatever it might be. And so we add a little bit extra color all the way along the edge. So this is only if the poster or whatever it might be has color that goes to the edge, of course. If it's a white piece of material with type on it, then you don't have to worry about it. But anything which has any kind of color, even if it's not throughout, it might just be like a strip at the bottom, that color needs to go all the way to the edge and then past. This document right here doesn't actually have bleed on it, because if we look at the edge of the document, it's just got the white and then it goes to that gray. There's no red line. Remember that the red line around the outside indicates the bleed. So how would I add the bleed into a document that doesn't already have bleed on it? What did you say, Antonio? Not in the print settings. If you go to, yeah, who is that? I think it was Lara, right? Did you say document settings? Yeah, very good. So if you go to File and then go to Document Setup, inside Document Setup here, you can see that it's got bleed. So we can set the bleed in here. It's an 1/8 of an inch there. Although it didn't actually change it when I did that one. File, document setup. Why is it not adding it? It actually says that this one has bleed. Why am I not seeing the bleed? Oh, there it is, because I had the guides off, that's why. So when you first make a document in Illustrator, remember that at the top here we have these various options like saved, mobile, web, print, film and video. The only one that would you'd need bleed is anywhere where you're doing something for print, right? So if you're making something for video or for web or anything like that, you don't have to worry about bleed at all. So if we choose print and we choose any of these print settings, like let's say I choose letter, on the right hand side under these presettings, under more settings, this is where we could set the bleed. So here it doesn't do it by default, but I can add 0.125 IN or 9 points is the default for bleed in the US. And I think for most parts of the world actually. And then remember that the bleed is that red line. So any color needs to extend to that bleed area. So if I had a black background on this document, I would want that black background to go all the way to the very edge, not right to there. I don't think I showed you this. So this is text wrap. Let's say I have a box of texts right here, and I wanted to put something over the top of that text that creeps into it. Like maybe it's a photograph of something, and it wants to push the text out of the way. I can select this object, and we can go down to text wrap. I always get confused with InDesign when I do text wrap and Illustrator. Where is it going? Object text wrap make. So if I click object text wrap make, you can see here now that it has pushed the type out of the way of that circle, and if I move the circle, you can see how it's affecting that type. Edit. Sorry, I should have set up a better demonstration for this. I'm getting confused with InDesign now because I've been teaching InDesign all week. I thought that we could change the settings under a panel called text wrap that was under there, but I'm not seeing it now. Where is that setting? Does anybody know? Well, because I want to change the setting of this. We could probably do it in properties actually. Let's do it. Let's see if we can see it here. Offset. No. I'll go over that on Monday because I didn't set that up properly. Okay, spell check. So I think I'd gone over this before with you once, but only briefly. So if you're not familiar and you need to check the spelling on your document in Illustrator, you can go to Edit Spelling, and you can either choose Check Spelling right here. So there's two ways of doing it. I click Start, and then obviously in this, because it's all lorem ipsum, pretty much every word is going to be misspelt. You can also do you can do Edit, so with the text selected, if I do Edit, Auto Spell Check. Auto spell check will put that red zigzagging line underneath anything which is misspelt. And then if you right click on it, it'll give you a possible change for that. So again, this is lorem ipsum, so it doesn't really make a lot of sense, but there you go. So that's how you do spell check. How to add something to a group. Right at the very beginning of the semester, we had done an exercise where we'd rotated an object around a center point. And I'd use the direct selection tool here to pull this down, if you remember, and then use the anchor point tool to get rid of that. And then I'd rotated this. And part of the reason for doing this is that I end up with a group. So I'm going to set this to 30 degrees, hit copy, and then do Command D, Command D, Command D. Now, if I group this, so if I select all of these objects and I do Command G or Object Group, these objects are now grouped. So if I click on it with the selection tool, they all get selected at once, right? If I double click on this now we're in isolation mode. So if you want to add something to a group, all you have to do is double click and go inside of it. So if I double click on this group, now I can go inside here and maybe add something to this middle here. If I go back out of the group then, and I select it with the selection tool, that center is also part of that group. So you could also copy and paste something within a group as well. Masking. There are two types of masks. Can anybody tell me what the two types of masks are in Illustrator? Clipping mask and what's the other one? Masking mask. Close. Opacity mask. So remember that the clipping mask is a shape which is used to hide everything else. So like, as this is, if I was to place an image into here, let's place something in. So let's say I copy this and I place this into here and send this to the back. I would need this shape actually not just to be a group, I would need it to be a compound path so I can make a clipping mask. So I could choose compound path make, and then if I select this image as well, I can do Command 7, and then that image is then contained within that shape, right? So it's contained within all of these shapes because all of these shapes have become a compound shape. So Illustrator basically sees those shapes as one. So the other type of mask, remember, is the opacity mask, and this is the one that we do through the transparency panel. So here you'd click on Make a Mask, and then by default it hides everything, but you can take Clip off, and then anywhere you put black. So if I choose this mask and I draw a black rectangle here, it'll hide that part of it. And in the demo that we did for the worksheet, we had done this as a gradient so that the image gradually fades out, right? So the main difference between a clipping mask and an opacity mask is that an opacity mask can mask things using gradients, subtle transitions of tone. You know, it could be a blend, for instance. Could even be a photographic image that you place into there with different levels of gray. So you could add texture into it. Whereas a clipping mask is always the actual shape of the object. It has to be a hard edge. Graphic styles. I had touched upon graphic styles, but we haven't talked about them a lot, so I thought I'd bring them up again. So if you go down to graphic styles, this is a panel where it stores, or you can store various effects on top of each other. So like if I create a shape with the ellipse tool and I choose one of these graphic styles, if we look at it then in the appearance panel, it has these effects applied to it. So it's got a fill gradient, it's got a feather setting on this one, and then it's got another fill gradient above that. So it's basically offsetting the fill a little bit by blurring it, which is what's giving it that slight 3D effect. There are also libraries of those graphic styles that you can load. So I lost my palette there. So under these graphic styles, if I go to these libraries, you can see that there are 3D effects that you can load. So if I was to choose this shape and apply this one now, I would end up with that. Or I choose this, or this, or this, or this. And these are effects, of course, that you could still continue to edit by going back into the appearance panel and looking at those settings. Here I could double click on the bevel emboss, the 3D bevel, and I could rotate it to a different angle and what have you. So you can also create these graphic styles yourself. So anything that you've created where you've applied different effects to it, like 3D effects or blurs or what have you, you can store it within here and then you can reuse them. Some here for neon effects. So let's say I wanted to create some type. I could choose this. Let's take the... So again, I could go in here and I could edit what this actually looks like. I think this must have a black fill somewhere. Anyway, you can load additional libraries of those graphic styles. Play around with those and see what's available. And then the width tool, we'd gone over this quite a bit, I think, at the beginning, but just to remind you that the width tool allows you to make certain parts of a path thicker or thinner. So you can use this as a way to create shapes, actually. And you can also hold Option on one side and drag out one side different from another side. So you can use it as a way to manipulate shapes. Remember that the width tool also is associated with these width profiles. So if you want to save a shape that you've created, you can click on it right here and it'll add it to those profiles. We spent quite a bit of time on Pathfinder, so I won't spend too much time on this, but I just wanted to remind you of some of the capabilities you have with Pathfinder. So Pathfinder allows you to add, subtract, divide shapes in a variety of different ways. We can keep them editable in certain situations, like if you unite shapes by holding Option when you apply it. You can combine those in such a way that I can still move this around, even though visually it looks like they're combined. And then remember, you can expand that afterwards by clicking there. So we have add to shape, subtract or minus, front. We have intersect, exclude. This is very much like the shape builder tool in some ways. It allows you to combine shapes and subtract shapes from each other in different ways. We had done an exercise, I think a couple of weeks ago, where we'd made the arches, and that exercise in part was to have you go over using guides. So remember that in Illustrator, if you have the rulers up, Command R, or View, Show Rulers, you can drag a guide from a ruler down to create a horizontal guide from the top or a vertical guide from the side. But then any shape that you draw or any path that you create, so it could be with the pen tool, could be with basic shape tool, you can do Command 5 or View, Guides, Make, and convert that into a guide also. Guides can also be hidden, so I can do Command semicolon to hide those, because sometimes they're a bit distracting when you're actually trying to figure out if the design is working. But they're useful in terms of structuring your design when you're setting up your design initially. InDesign is actually much better for creating grid structures because of the way it's set up for page layout design. But if you wanted to make a page layout design in Illustrator where you're using a grid structure, what you could do is start in the top left-hand corner and draw a rectangle which fills the entire page. So in this case, I think it's letter size. So if I make it 8.5 inches, tab 11 inches, it should be exactly that size of the document. Then if I do Object, path, offset path. I can offset it, say 0.5 of an inch. And I think I did 0.5 of a point, so let me do that again. Object path, offset path. And I'll do minus 0.5 IN for inches. So now I have a guide for the margin of a page layout. I can do Command 5 to make a guide for it. And then for the inside part of that, I can delete the original rectangle. We can use this tool, which is the rectangle grid tool. If you drag out with the rectangle grid tool like this, I can adjust the number of columns and rows by using the arrows. So I haven't let go with my mouse. I could adjust how many of those columns there are. So maybe I want to do a 4-column grid structure and then have the rows be 6 columns. If I want to create a gutter is a space in between columns which is used for text, for instance. You could increase the size of the stroke here. Usually you might make the gutter, say, the size of your leading. So let's say your leading was 16.6 point. I could set it to that for the stroke. Then we've got this very thick line. The ones on the outside I don't need, so I'm going to delete that. These ones I'll then go to Object. I'll choose Path, Outline Stroke. So this is a filled object. And then I'll do Command 5 to make guide. So now you've got a really nice grid structure for laying out design. So if you wanted to put an image on a layout, you've got a place to put one here. We could have an area over here where we could put some text. So particularly for like multi-page documents, like if you were making like a PDF presentation, you could create the same grid structure on every page. You could duplicate this artboard, and then it gives you a consistent structure for where elements go on the page, but it also allows you to have some flexibility. So have an understanding of how to use the guides, and then making and applying brushes. So I'm not going to go over this in detail again, but we talked about this, and there was a worksheet where we've gone over the brushes. Remember, in Illustrator, we have these various types of brushes. So there are 5 basic types of brushes in Illustrator. We have these calligraphic brushes at the top, art brushes, bristle brushes, pattern brushes, and if you try to grab any element and drag it into the brushes panel, you can see that list of brushes here. So the 2 which are not made out of an actual graphic object, calligraphic brush and bristle brush, these are only settings within the brush. These are grayed out because I can't drag something in there and make a calligraphic brush. But a scatter brush, an art brush, pattern brush, these are all made by dragging something into the brushes panel. And we had done this on a couple of examples. So if you remember, we'd done stars with the scatter brush. We'd use the art brush to make kind of like this rainbow thing. But you could put anything in there. The important thing to understand is that the scatter brush is scattering objects along a path. The art brush is stretching stuff along a path. And then the pattern brush is tiling things along the side of a brush. So we had done that, as I'd made on the worksheet. I'd had you make a sort of decorative element that you'd made for a border. So those are your brushes. Remember, you also have libraries of brushes that you can load from here. You could also go online and you could download brushes as well. So you could do a search for Illustrator brushes and download packages of brushes for Illustrator also that you could load into here. The perspective grid tool, we had done a couple of things working with the perspective grid tool, as well as doing it for creating illustrations, by the way. You might use the perspective grid tool even in typographic contexts. You know? Remember that when you're working with the perspective grid tool, oh, I didn't put an A in marathon, oh We'll ignore that. We'll ignore the fact I misspelled marathon. If I bring the grid up, I could do that by doing Shift Command I, or if I click on the perspective grid tool, it will also automatically come up. And then we can work with the perspective grid tool in a couple of different ways, but if you're doing it with type, you're generally going to have to drag the type into the grid. So you would do that using the perspective selection tool, and then you can drag that into perspective. So this can be an interesting way to make your designs feel more dynamic. Rather than everything being flat on the page, you could create a sense of movement and dynamism by creating type which is following the perspective. You could even have it sort of follow the perspective of a photographic image which is included. You know, maybe you have a photograph of runners on a road, and you can make the type fit to the angle of the road, that type of thing. Applying effects and deleting effects. I think I've already sort of touched upon this, but basically any of the effects that are under here, so the 3D and materials, the 3D classic, any of these elements here under the effects galleries, all of this ends up in the appearance panel. So anything you apply shows up in here. So applying an appearance is pretty easy. If you wanted to edit it, you need to select the object again, and then you can go into it. So for instance, if you have an object which you're extruding with a 3D effect, if you want to edit that, maybe you've closed this window. If you go to the appearance panel, you can see that it shows up right here, and then you can double click on it. It'll bring up this panel again. And then you can readjust it. I realize that a few people have got confused between the different 3D effects. So there are two sets of 3D effects effectively. There's the 3D and materials, which are new. These were brought out a couple of versions ago. And then there are the 3D classic versions here. And these have been in here for probably 10, 15 years. And they work slightly differently. So the 3D materials, these new ones right here, they have some capabilities that the old 3D classic doesn't have, like this ability to twist this shape. You can't do that with the old classic ones. All right, you can't inflate an object with the old classic ones either, like this. So the way that I'm inflating that object, I can't do that with the classic versions. But one thing to bear in mind is that these new 3D effects are actually being created out of pixels. So if I go to the edge of this, you can see that fairly clearly. You can't expand this into a vector shape. Whereas if you choose the effects 3D and materials 3D classic, those shapes you can convert it from a 3D object, an appearance, into a vector shape by expanding it, by going to object expand. And this is pretty useful sometimes. So they both had advantages and disadvantages. The new 3D materials, you can also apply materials to them, which I haven't really gone over. But play around with that as well. You can add various materials, like you can make it look like it's made out of stone or something like that. And it also has superior capabilities for adding a drop shadow and that type of thing. We've gone over using image trace quite a bit, but just as a reminder, a couple of things about image trace. Image trace is converting a bitmap image into a vector in some way or another, right? And when you do that, it helps if you start off with a higher resolution image. So even if the image is low resolution and you res it up, so you go into Photoshop and you increase the resolution, it would still do a better job of image tracing it, even though you're not adding any extra detail into it. It would be easier for it to image trace it. So that's the first thing, is always when you're doing the image tracing, if necessary, if the image is a low resolution image, go into Photoshop and make it a higher resolution before you image trace it. And then the other thing I wanted to remind you about, I'll just do a quick image trace of something here. So I'll bring this image in and image trace it. So when we're image tracing, we have this button up here at the top. Next to it, you've got this pull down menu with various preset choices for how it's going to image trace it. But with any of these that you choose, so let's say I choose logo, you can see that it's giving me this sort of series of different colors. We can always edit this. I can go into this panel right here, image trace, and here it says it's 30 colors. I could take this down to say 10 colors and then see what we've got. So it'll take a minute to refresh it, and then you can see we've got a slightly more abstracted version of it. Or I could switch it just to black and white, and then we would end up with something like this. So this is that same list in here, and we could switch between those various choices. And don't forget that you can also adjust how it traces it. So this is silhouette, and it's just showing up as black. But if I drag this back a bit, you can see now that it's tracing it fairly well. And I can also adjust under advanced whether the paths are more accurately traced, so you can see more detail shows up then. If I drag it over to here, there's all of this fine detail in here that it's capturing. Whereas if I drag it back a bit, it might actually be better where it kind of simplifies it, smooths it out. The other thing I want to remind you about is that when you do this initially, it's an appearance. So it is still actually an image that's placed here, and we're having the appearance of what it would look like as a vector, but to keep it editable in this way, it has to be an appearance. When we expand it, now it's literally a vector, and now you can edit it as a vector. So I could go in here now with any of my vector tools, like the eraser for instance, and I could go in here, let's make the eraser smaller, and I could erase that part right there so that we disconnect him from this background, and maybe take off this part right here. And then I could select all the bit around the outside that I don't want, and I could delete it.
Is there anything in Vue that's efficient to minimize those anchor points? Like if you wanted it to be more simplified?
You can do this, so you can go to Object, Path, Simplify, and then this will reduce, and you can go further that way. This reduces the number of points that you have in it. So obviously it's changing the shape of it a little bit as you're reducing it, but if you do it a little bit, it doesn't really look that much different usually, but it'll take out quite a lot of points. It also reduces the file size by doing that. I've put here when to use which selection tool. So I'd gone over this right at the very beginning of the semester. I talked about the difference between the group selection tool, the selection tool, and the direct selection tool. Hopefully by this point in the course you've got the hang of this. So the group selection tool, the selection tool always selects an entire group. The group selection tool selects objects that are part of a group. So in this case actually this is not part of that group. If I select with this, it selects everything here because this is grouped. But if I use the group selection tool, I can select the head separate and separate it. Whereas if I click a second time, now I've got everything. And then the direct selection tool, of course, allows you to select parts of objects. So you can click on an anchor point to move it around, or you can click on a path and move it, and so on. Understand the basic principles and mechanics of typographic formatting. So we talked about using the character panel, and I talked a little bit about leading, kerning, and tracking. What's the difference between kerning and tracking? Can anybody tell me? Yeah. So kerning is the space between two individual characters. So you would generally do kerning on areas of type which are relatively small, probably. So like if you had a headline, for instance, you might want to go in and kern that because that headline might be quite big, and the space between the lines, between the text, also becomes more apparent as it gets bigger. So in this case, this doesn't really need a lot of kerning, and you'll probably find that with most fonts which are professionally designed, you don't have to do a lot of kerning. if you download a font from a website like dafont.com, oftentimes those fonts are designed by somebody who's not really a professional font designer. It might be somebody like me who's decided for fun to design a font, or maybe like a student that's designed a font and they put them on there for free for anybody to get. But they don't really understand the nuance of like hinting. So when you design a font, you create kerning pairs which adjust the kerning of when an H is next to an E or when an E is next to an A and so on. And they may well have not done that on a free font. So with this particular typeface, if I select between two letters, we might find that there is a change along here. Let me try one which is like this one right here on the uppercase lower Y. Between that and the letter E, it's automatically setting that to -94. If this was set to 0, which it might be if it was an amateur font, it would look like this. Because of the shape of that letter Y, it looks like there's a huge gap between the Y and the E. So that kerning is adjusting that space. So they had it set to -94 like that, so that it feels like everything fits together perfectly. So the difference between kerning and tracking is that kerning is the adjustment of that individual character, between two individual characters, the space. Whereas tracking is also the space between characters, but over, say, an entire word. So if I select this entire word and I do Option right arrow, remember that that keyboard shortcut is the same for tracking and kerning. So Option right arrow will open up the spacing, and Option left arrow will bring the spacing closer together. And then leading is the space between lines of text. Let's make this one a little bit smaller. So the leading is the space from baseline to baseline. That's how it's measured. So the baseline here is that blue line that the type is sitting on. And if I select this piece of type called subhead, I can adjust the leading by using Option up arrow to put the leading closer together, or Option down arrow to put it further apart. Those keyboard shortcuts, by the way, work the same in InDesign, Illustrator, and Photoshop, and so on. So whether you're doing kerning or tracking or leading, it's Option and then arrow keys. So leading is the up and down arrows. Tracking and kerning are both using the left-right arrows. You should be able to modify shapes using the pen tool and the pencil tool. So one of the things that we talked about when we were doing the character design project is how you could start with a raw material, like a rectangle, and then you could use the pen tool and you could add points to it and move those points around to create a more complex shape. So remember, when you're using the pen tool, if you put your cursor over a path, it becomes the Add Anchor Points tool, and you can start moving those points around. If you use the Command key, you get the Direct Selection tool, and then you can move them around like that. If I use Option, I can use I can convert those then into curves, or I could curve a path. And then the other way that I'd suggest is you could use the pencil tool. I don't think I've got my pencil tool loaded here. Let me load my pencil tool. Where is it? Oh, here it is. So with the pencil tool, if you have an object selected and then you draw close to the shape, remember that can redraw the shape as well. So when you're doing this, you've got to start close to the shape and end close to it. You should also be able to use the gradients in the software. So we've looked at the gradient panel and how this works. We've done a few exercises with gradients. Remember that you could use gradients as a way to define form. So for instance, one example that we had done earlier in the semester is that we created a cylinder where we start with an ellipse, we duplicate it down, We then draw a rectangle between these two that starts from here to here. We unite these together using Pathfinder. So just that bottom shape and the rectangle. Send that to back. And then if I apply a gradient to this, and I adjust that gradient, I can make it feel like this is going around a circular shape then. Because gradients can be used in effect to apply chiaroscuro, shading, to an object, to make it feel like it has dimension. You're not necessarily using it for that purpose. You could use gradients for other reasons, but that's a good example of where you might use it. On the gradient panel, we also, don't forget, you can have a gradient which is a linear gradient. You can also have a radial gradient, and you can also have a freeform gradient. Remember, on the freeform gradient, basically what you're doing is you're adding points across the surface, and you can add points anywhere. And then by double clicking on them, you can change the color of those points. So this is a relatively new feature in Illustrator, and it really makes it easy to create very interesting soft transitions of tone for certain areas in a design. We've gone over using the mesh tool, if you remember. We've done a demonstration for an apple. And the mesh tool can be used to create very, very realistic illustrations that are vector based. In some ways, the mesh tool isn't as useful as it was before they introduced this freeform gradient tool, because in some ways that does a very similar thing. It allows you to create subtle transitions of tone across the surface in different directions at once. Whereas before you could have a gradient that went linear across this way, you could change the angle, but it was all going in one direction. Or a radial gradient all goes out from a center point. But here you can have that gradient going all sorts of directions. So you can really create an interesting sense of form with it. So the mesh tool is we'd used before for that. The perspective isometric theory and practice. So by the end of the course, you should have a pretty firm understanding of the difference between perspective and how that works, and isometric. Perspective, remember, when we think of perspective, we think of what's called mathematical or linear perspective, which was developed during the Renaissance. There is also vertical perspective, which was developed prior to that, where you just put things higher up within the picture plane, and that gives you the sense of perspective. But the way that perspective was formalized during the Renaissance is you have a horizon line or an eye level, and then you have these lines that lead to vanishing points on the horizon line. So any particular object would have at least two vanishing points probably, although you can have 1 point perspective where there's one vanishing point. Unlike isometric, remember in isometric, everything runs parallel. So this is useful in terms of like engineering drawings. It's also useful for video games because you can move things around the picture plane and they don't have to change angle. You should know how to use the artboards within the Illustrator. So remember that with the artboards tool, you can duplicate an artboard. When you duplicate it, you can either duplicate it with the stuff that's on there, like I did just now, or you can duplicate just the artboard. At the top here in the options bar, I have this checkbox, move copy artwork with artboard. If I take that off, now if I duplicate it by holding option and dragging it, I just get the artboard. And then remember that there is the artboard panel right here where you can add artboards. You can also arrange them. You can change their order and that type of thing. You can move them individually as well by clicking on them with the artboard tool to rearrange them. Maybe I want this one to go down here or this one to go down here. We can also use the artboard tool to change the size of each individual artboard by just dragging out. Or at the top here, we could change it to a specific size. So here's letter size. You can have all these various preset sizes. Or you could set it as a width height right here. These artboards, by the way, can be used if you wanted to create a multi-page PDF. So for instance, you might want to make a multi-page PDF as a presentation. So each of these you could think of as pages within a document. And you could have text that goes from one page to the next page and so on. You could have it linked from page to page. I also wanted to remind you that you could start your Illustrator files from templates. So if you go to File New, under some of these, you'll notice that there are some templates in here. So under Web, for instance, if I go to Web here, we've got this color block template, minimalist business cards. You've got these various templates that you could download. There's ones here for symbols. If I go under print, you've got different sets of templates. You can also access templates by going to stock.adobe.com, and you could download templates from there. So the beauty of these is, rather than starting from scratch, let's say I choose this one, I could download this file. Rather than me beginning with something from nothing, I can begin with a starting point, and then I can go in there and I can change things around on it and make it how I want it to look. I'm trying to download it, but it's not downloading for some reason. Come on, download. Well, anyway, explore those. It's also kind of, it can be a useful way to see how to construct files. If you take these and break them apart and analyze them, so if you go into some of these files, they might, for instance, be using paragraph styles and character styles. And I don't really focus on paragraph styles and character styles in this class too much. I do want to teach InDesign. But you also have those features in Illustrator. So if you're not familiar, a paragraph style or a character style is a way of saving formatting so that you could use it again. So if you're doing, like, let's say again, you're doing like a multi-page document, like a PDF that has lots of different pages, maybe a visual identity guide, for instance. You might want to have all of the headings on each of the pages be the same font. You could save those settings within a paragraph style, and you can apply it on all of those pages. A character style is a similar thing. It saves formatting, but a paragraph style can be applied to only be applied to a paragraph. It can't be applied to a part of a paragraph. But it can also be can include things like left aligned, right aligned, centered, things to do with the actual paragraph panel. Whereas a character style can only be like the font, the color of the font, things like that. So if you open up these templates and sort of dissect them, analyze the way that they're built, it can help you to kind of also have a better understanding of what Illustrator is capable of. So it's a good way to learn about the software, I think. If you get good at this, you can also make a living creating templates and selling them through adobestock.com if you want. I think I'm almost through now. How does Illustrator integrate with other software in Adobe CC? So I'm not going to really do any more demonstrations because we're already at 2:13, and I want to do the critiques. But basically, over the next couple of weeks, I'll do a couple more demonstrations which relate to how Illustrator integrates with other software. So one of them is how Illustrator integrates with Photoshop. Remember that you can now copy and paste layers from Illustrator into Photoshop. This is a relatively new feature. It used to be that you'd have to export the layers and then open up the Photoshop file. Now you can simply select everything within a document, and if it's in layers, when you paste it, you can paste those layers into Photoshop. So if you're making an animation, for instance, you could make an animation in Illustrator by creating a series of layers that slightly change. We'll do a demonstration for this afterwards. And then you can bring it into Photoshop and convert it into an animation. You can also use Illustrator in a similar way in conjunction with a program like Animate. Animate is a vector-based software, and you can import stuff from Illustrator into Animate either as layers or as frames. So you can use this as a way. So I will do a demonstration over the next couple of weeks on how to make an animation from Illustrator, take it into Animate and make it actually animate. And then we'll also look at how you could use Illustrator files in an InDesign document You can either take files from Illustrator and copy and paste them as vectors. You can also place them as images into InDesign. But I wanted to give you some kind of context of how Illustrator fits within the sort of bigger picture of the Creative Cloud ecosystem. Okay, so I think that's enough for the review for right now. I realize that kind of goes on a little bit, but hopefully that's helpful just to fill in any holes. If there's stuff that you feel like you're not quite understanding, by all means, over the next couple of weeks, whilst we're finishing up, ask me what it is that you need to ask me. You know, if you're trying to do something, you're not able to do it, or you keep running into certain problems over and over again, I want to try and solve those. All right, so for the critique, if you want to be in the first group, I'm going to have you come up here and put your name on the board. Hey, how are you?
I'm good. I would appreciate if I could have a few moments of the
Sure.
class time to plug professional studies.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi everyone. I am Kim Garrison. I teach here in the Visual and Performing Arts department, and I teach a class that you might be interested in. It's called Professional Studies, and it is for artists and graphic designers to figure out how to actually interface with the professional world and make money with your art and design skills. For some of you, it is a requirement or an option as part of finishing a certificate program. So I might see you anyway. So I just wanted to take a few moments to let you know a little bit more about what the class is about, because it's a super exciting class with a super boring title. Professional Studies. I was not in charge of the marketing for this class. But I know that when I was an art and graphic design student back in the day, I had many questions inside my head that were swirling around there, troubling me, like, how do I price my work for clients? How do I do work for clients? How do I get paid? If I want to work for a company, how do I create a resume, an interview for the job? How do I promote myself? How do I work with a client from start to finish? How do I make sure no one rips me off with copyright and that I'm not ripping other people off? And how do I do my taxes? And right, and just it gets going in your head and it starts to challenge you, and you start to question yourself. Can I do all of these things? Do I understand this? Is my family right in thinking that I'm crazy because I'm pursuing some sort of visual art thing? I don't know how to talk to them about it. I don't know how to talk to other people about my skills so that I can get a job or ask the right questions to understand the job they might want me to do. So this is what this class is all about, is answering those questions and all the other ones that are in your head that I didn't say. The whole space of the class is to answer those questions step by step and to anticipate the questions that you might not even know that you have, and walk you through the process. You'll make a portfolio not just based on what's your best classwork, but actually based on how do portfolios operate and what do they demonstrate about you to potential clients and employers. So you go through that, you create a website with your artwork on it, you create business cards and branding, and we talk about social media and promotion and starting your own business if that's the way you want to go, freelance design business. We talk about the different jobs that are out there in different art and design fields, from the entertainment industry to advertising to fine art, the gallery, museum, world, you know, all our passion projects that we want to do on the side, the making, all the things. So, and we mash up lots of people together from within the art and design fields here at OCC so that you're all cross-pollinating your ideas and your questions and building a network of people. We do this on Wednesdays and it's on Zoom, and then we have tasks that we do through the week. It's Wednesday afternoons in the fall, and then in the spring I usually try to do it at night. to give you an option for whatever works for your schedule. So if any of you are in that position where you need answers to those questions, I look forward to helping you out with that. Again, I'm Kim Garrison, and the class is Art 180 Professional Studies. Thanks.
All right, cool.
All right,
Thanks,
thank
Kim.
you.
You're welcome.
Yes,
Good to see you.
yes, in the future.
All right, so if you want to be in group 1 for the critique, put your name up on the board right here. Or I'll do it for you, actually. So. Who else wants to be in group 1? I got nothing. I got nothing. So I've got 3. Is there anybody else? Youngin?
Art 180 Professional Studies.
And somebody else raised their hand as well. Did you raise your hand? That was a good reaction.
I do need help.
You need help? Okay, I'll come with that. Was there anybody else that put their hand up? I thought somebody else put their hand up just now. No. So I've got 4 people. I've got Christine, Lara, Raymond, and Youngin. Is that it? Okay. Well, I'll do that first group, and then we'll carry on from there. So if you're in the first group, if you can upload your files to the project so that I can download them and look at them on the screen. And then once you've done that, bring a chair up to the front, and we'll do the critique. Let me move this out of the way.
If you're having a small technical issue.
Okay, I'll come and help. Give me 1 second.
Thank you.
Oh yeah. You know what it was? It was because you had a stroke around the black. So the stroke was kind of throwing it off.
So it was like all the time.
It was the stroke on the black. Okay. No. So if I go back to this thing, if I select just the black yeah. So right here it has a black stroke on it. If I now apply the
So
it's going to go crazy. Because what it's doing is it's throwing. Yeah. So that stroke is throwing everything off. So just take select just the black.
mhm. It's
Select it all again.
moving the like spin stuff.
And give
No,
Oh, no,
just
it's-
as it's moving, the dots stay still.
Yeah.
So not tipping out and looking funny.
Yeah, when you upload it actually for the group, for the critique, can you upload the Illustrator files, not a JPEG to the critique? Sorry, I realise that's confusing, but can you put it into the assignment itself? Not to, because there's one for this for the assignment and one that's is for a critique, but that critique is for other people in the class to kind of comment on it. But I want you to put it into the assignment so I can download the Illustrator file and mess with it. Yeah.
What about internal downloading?
Okay.
You don't know which
It's not like
in the right place, or because Illustrator's like all.
it says it's installed.
I can't find it there, and I can't. Maybe I'm not looking.
So what is it for?
Something told me it's a confirmation of the sixth time.
Have you tried it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Good.
If you want it to be less, the deck is like taller.
What kind of fun is it?
I guess we could try color.
I'm just trying to.
Yeah, no, if it looks like the other image, it looks right to me. We can look at the image and do it.
So when you activate it,
Or if we need to, it looks right.
So everything put in there.
Yeah.
So they just search
Not
on
loading any of these.
Adobe Pixel.
Yeah, you can do that for now. I'll look into it, but I don't know what happens with my stuff. You can do a Google search, let's see, say that.
Yeah, and then it's affecting something that's going, it's doing it here too.
Okay.
In Illustrator. You can see if you see any reasons.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's weird.
Can I have a copy of it?
All right, I'm ready to do the first critique. We're running out of time.
I was trying to believe this too. Yeah, I'm like, no.
All right, so this is Raymond's project. I'll open it in Illustrator, that might be easier to play with. So is there anything you want to say about it?
I was trying to find a place for the teapot, but
This
I was
is
trying to like maybe not incorporate it at all.
uh-huh.
Because I wanted it like to be on the two designs, but I can really make it.
So this one's probably the most, well, these two are the most finished, right?
Yeah.
This one and this one. On this one, you're using a photographic image,
Yeah.
and then on this one, you're not. So these are two different ideas, I guess, right? At this point, trying to figure out which one to go with. On this one as well, I feel like in terms of the hierarchy, that the word Bigelow gets kind of lost compared to some of the other text on there. I feel like a bit like on this one, at least in terms of the hierarchy, it's clear that that's the brand,
Yeah.
and then that this goes steps down a level in terms of the importance a little bit. So that's one thing I would think about is like the organization of the information in terms of the hierarchy. On this one here, you're choosing a font. Are you using this font specifically for that flavor? Do you think?
Not because of the flavor, but I noticed on their branding they
Uh-huh.
had the same font,
Uh-huh.
so I was trying to incorporate that.
Like the same font for different flavors, you mean?
No, because when I switched up this tea,
Uh-huh.
the Bigelow, they had that font, and I was like, well, let me just use that,
Oh, I see.
just to.
Well, remember, I'm having you sort of redesign it as if they've come to you as a design firm,
Okay.
and they're saying to you, we want to update the design and make it sort of more contemporary and give it. So I would steer clear from doing what they're doing right now. You might still kind of keep some of their flavor. There's an advantage to doing that as well because people are accustomed to that brand, you know, and so they might. If it's completely different, it might be too far. You know, you might use something that's already there and build upon that, but just sort of streamline out or something. I feel like when we go from this font, which is a very traditional font, and same with the herbal tea, these serif typefaces, the contrast with that feels a bit awkward to me with that kind of hand-drawn type.
Yeah.
This one is So this one I think works better in terms of the way that you're using the type. But so here you're using a slab serif typeface,
Yeah.
and then you're using a font which is a modern style serif typeface. I probably wouldn't. So this obviously to some extent is
trying to fix that.
my personal opinion,
Yeah.
but
Don't
um,
capitalize.
I would take the. I wouldn't do the this what they call small caps. I don't think you're actually using a small caps font for one thing, but you probably have this locked, do you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah, okay. So like on here, you're making this font size bigger. Oh no, it's not that. Yes.
That's what I was trying to fix. I was like, it's all capitalized.
Oh, it is small caps. So I see you're using a small caps font. So if you choose Bodoni, see if there's another Bodoni. It looks like I've only got the Bodoni small caps on here. But you could probably load another Bodoni. So if you know how to load the Adobe fonts. If you go to fonts.adobe.com. Oops, yeah. So there's a couple of different Bedonis that they have in the Adobe collection. This is a pretty big family as well. So the one that you're choosing, probably not as bold as that. It's probably more like this. So if I activate this one, this is Bodoni URW. It hasn't loaded yet. Oh, I've also right now I've got these filters on for sans serif. So if I clear that, then I can search for it. So I actually have a bunch of Bedonis, but because I had it set to sans serif, it wasn't finding them. So here you can choose them. That'll change it into those. I also think with this that you might want to bring the leading closer together. So these two words actually interlock quite nicely because the G comes down with the K. It would give that more of a shape. But I think all of this should probably be smaller relative to the Bigelow part. So if we brought this, maybe this needs to go into something else. This part I think needs to get larger. Family 2 plan 694. I think we'll leave that off on this particular position. So maybe you have it somewhere else on the box, like maybe on the lid or something. But here I think I would keep it off because there isn't really a space for it right there, unless you were to change this shape, you know. And then I still think that this should go smaller relative to that because I feel like this is the more important element on the page, you know. I do quite like the T part actually.
That's something I was trying to incorporate in all three, but it just
I personally think that the color combination on this one right now is a little weird.
yeah.
These two colors in relationship, I think are a little strange. I might go with. Let me get rid of that one. The way that this is set up is a little bit weird as well. Actually, let me see something real quick. Okay, let me see.
This is the bigger one.
That's the die. Okay, so the die actually wants to be at the very top, and it should have no color on it. This one here is actually the background color. So this one we're going to put on a different layer, and we'll put this right at the very bottom. This one's also on the die, right? Yeah. So these bits as well, this color and this color, should be down here. And then these ones here, I don't think they should have color in them. So like that. Here you have the text going almost right to the very edge of the box. I would bring this in a little bit, because where they're folding it, you don't want it to end up like on the fold. So you want to give them a little bit of leeway there. And then this piece of text, let me see what size this is. 10.79. This could probably go a little bit smaller, not too much, but it could probably go a little bit smaller. It seems a bit funny as well for me to switch from this font to this font, because these are sort of like the two same bits of information. I think I would do that in that same font, so it would have to be smaller. And maybe it switches to white. This one's regular, yeah, let's see. What is OIDS?
It's not in the case where they have on their
Net weight. So net weight is 2.11 ounces. OIDS, net. That's weird. No idea what that means. Oh, like this? Ah, maybe. Yeah, maybe. Let's take that off. Let's just put it.
Just in general, take it off.
Yeah, just take it off. And then, so this could actually just be net weight 2.11 ounces,
Okay.
grams, 59 grams. I also think this gets lost against this color, but I do think that this color, this is where I was originally.
I would try to put a nice big font 28.
Uh-huh.
And then T-dice too, because it just looks kind of plain to me.
This is pretty big as well. Let's take that down a little bit. It's a little large. The thing I would like to you to focus on as well is like this one, the color looked pretty good. We've rearranged things here now, so I didn't put this down to the bottom, but this yellow here should really be at the bottom if I can select it. There we go. So this one should be here, background, and then there's another one in front of that actually. So this one needs to go down there as well. And these, I think, something like that. Anyway. Like this one overall, like the green and the yellow, it feels like it makes sense. But I feel like on this, so this is English breakfast tea. Yeah. Let me try this color. I'm going to go to the color panel for a second and see what the complement of that is. Let's try that one. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. Yeah, let's try. I think it should be maybe a little warmer.
Usually artistic island is something that's very deep to that area and the little bit.
Hmm. I'm not getting it either, but play around with that a little bit. I think the color's off on that one.
This one I'm just
Is this for green tea?
This is the
Do you know?
gray.
Earl Grey. Earl Grey. Okay. Earl Grey actually, I think, is generally shown as purple. I think that has to do with it being the type of flavor it has bergamot in it. I think.
I picked it up. It's very I'm sorry, like on base.
Yeah. Let's see. Well, that's not true, I guess. So that one's purple. I guess that's not as true. I thought they were generally purple, but that's not, it doesn't seem to be true. I guess I imagine that. So Earl Grey is bergamot, so it has that kind of yellowish orange color plant. So you could maybe incorporate that into it, and then like maybe some kind of actual grey color. I know on one of those I saw they were using grey as the overall color. All right. Does anybody else have suggestions for Raymond on his tea box? Are you finished with the ingredients?
Honestly, I'm thinking of adding more, but I'm
I think it just needs the arrangement of it could do a little work. Let me see. Add 1 cup. Oh, so these are the instructions actually. So add 1 cup, 200 milliliters. So this is probably not. This is either all lowercase or all uppercase. I think not upper and then low. Just more water to see them in.
I normally don't add milk to mine, but
Oh, fresh milk. Tea bag. 1. Allow a tea bag. Remove the tea bag. Add 1. So milk. Wait. 6. Essentially. What could we do to make this more interesting? So first of all, it's steps. I mean, one thing you could consider doing is maybe making it. Yeah, you could do numbering for it. So whether you actually put step 1. Like something like that maybe, and then perhaps this could be a bolder font. So again, if you wanted to use styles for this, we could use a style, and the advantage of this is we can then just apply it. So I do type paragraph styles. I'm going to make one just called bold, and then I'll double click on this. And then under basic character formatting, oh, I don't have that as a bold font. Let's change this to so that way when I go to do step 2, I can just select this and then do bold. Step 3, then do bold. Step 4, And then you have this as just a loose text, I think, right? Or is it in a text box?
I believe it's in one single text box.
It's actually on a free floating piece of text. So I'm going to drag out a text box and fill it into there. I would allow a little bit more space. So the reason for putting in a text box is it means I can adjust where this ends, you know, where it starts to hit return. I would give a bit more space around the outside of this rectangle. Make that one perhaps more centered onto there. Maybe this box only needs to come up to about here, and then down at the bottom you could have something else that's implied in there.
I know they have that book the recycle.
Yeah, they have like the recycle logo and some other things like that. Yeah. But you made a really good start. It's just this part right here, by the way, it's stayed the same.
But yeah, I like it.
So that I don't have to keep changing the color of this. This hole in the middle of it, because right now this is a shape sitting on the top. If we select both that and that, yeah, either Pathfinder, or you could do Command 8 to make a compound shape, and then that would just become a hole through there. I think it's a good start. Just needs a little bit more work.
Yeah.
All right, very good. We have a look at the next one. So this is Christine's project. Do you want to say anything about it? So I might be missing images, that's the only trouble. It looks like you have a bunch of placed images. Am I getting a pretty good preview of it anyway? Yeah. So these are probably going to come out really pixelated because I don't actually have the images with it.
Yeah,
But I can get a pretty clear one. What was the font for it? I can see. I got it. And that's an Adobe font? No. Okay. It's called Made Sunflower. Let me see if I can download it real quick. Which one is it?
The name of this one is Made Sunflower. It seems like it's all
Oh, is this it? Made Sunflower, yeah. Okay, so I've downloaded that. Can you not load it? There we go. There we go. Okay, brilliant.
So initially, I was kind of like debating between something that's to be different or something like kind of in the same flair as what we were having.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I saw like a couple upgrades of like the tea packaging, like the before and after,
Uh-huh.
it didn't have any changes, so that's why I was kind of like, but then I saw, I think they have another line called Bigelow Benefit,
Uh-huh.
and that one has like a more contemporary
Oh, okay.
packaging. So I
Let me see that one.
I just saw on Amazon.
Bigelow benefits.
Yeah,
Like you benefit from it.
yeah, like this, yeah. So
Yeah,
they have a whole
yeah.
line,
I've seen that one. Yeah.
and that one is a lot
So
more
that. Oh, okay.
contemporary. But I
Is this a newer product?
It's a new line.
Yeah.
Or,
Okay.
but they all have benefits.
Oh, those are wonderful.
Yeah.
I love that
So then
one and
as
the
a,
rose.
after I made the packaging,
Uh-huh.
so I feel like it's not as modern as theirs now.
Yeah, maybe not actually. One thing you might think about with these as well is that you're distinguishing the different flavors through the color, which I think is good. But you might consider changing the design on each of the cups. Do you know what I mean? So that each of
Or
the
they have a different
like the cup
design.
has a sort of has a style which fits with that particular flavor or distinguisher. Maybe the color maybe you just change the color of it. You know, maybe on this one it's blue, but maybe on this one it's a sort of purplish gray color or something.
Yeah, maybe I can.
Maybe this one that it becomes more like greens and yellows. You know?
Yeah, because it does seem like maybe
Because otherwise it
selling
feels like
themselves.
you're just reusing that image. You know?
Yeah.
So, but it could even be a different
Yeah.
design, you know, and maybe that design that you have on the cup is then somehow repeated as a very simple background on the side panel or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then on this one, if you had a different pattern on the cup, you could have a different pattern on the side panel. You know what I mean? It's just a suggestion.
Yeah.
I really like them though overall. I think they're looking really good. You're pretty close. Yeah.
I just have to put it on the diagram.
Yeah, you need to put it on the die line, obviously, and you got to do the front and the back and all that stuff. Like you got to do the sides and the back and the top and all that.
So I already have the side and the back.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Like this and that.
Oh,
Far
do-
away.
okay. Okay, I see. So these were different versions that you were
Yeah.
doing with, yeah. So this is the side. Oh, that's the back. This is the sides. Oh, yeah, I see.
So in I missed that.
Yeah, you misspelled a couple of things, but you can check that. This one, I think it probably is just asking me to capitalize it. Yeah, you don't need to do that. Exquis. You're saying it exquisitely, right?
Yeah.
This doesn't see that as a word, does it?
The E is
Oh yeah, that's right. That's what it is.
for
Let me try and Google it. I think it does have an E actually. Yeah. I think it's just that the spell check doesn't see that. It doesn't recognize it for some reason. But it is spelled right. Maybe, I don't know. Oh no, now it's doing it. Yeah. So what was it? I don't know. There was something else misspelled, I guess, about it. This bit right here where you have one word on a line, it'd be better if we could try and bring that up onto the next line somehow. So let's try if I try track it. It might be a bit too far to go back. Yeah. That's track back too far now. So it's minus 40. So it's an essential. So it's an essential that we
I can pick that out.
see. So it's essential. Let's see if this will bring this up onto here. Yeah. Then you've got rid of that then. Then this is a new paragraph, right? No, it's not a big difference, but I think it would wait. You see, you've got one there as well. So this is what's referred to as a runt in typography, where you get like one word or part of a word at the end. again, we could probably bring one of these up, like, let's try this one here. And then by doing that, you could probably bring this up. Okay. Actually, you could even go from here, right? More than, I'm not quite sure why that goes onto another line. And then this is a new paragraph? Oh no, yeah. And then Bergmont, yeah. Bergmont. Overall though, I think it looks really good. It's just, yeah, putting it onto the die line now and just checking over little things like that. Okay. These are the other sides. I'm not crazy about this bit, to be honest with you. The leaf parts. I don't mind it so much on here, but I feel like it needs something else. The barcode I might put on the bottom, personally. And then here, I think that you have something with this flowing thing, which I think if it just feels a bit sparse to me. I feel like maybe like if you had these leaves on this one as well. Can't see it now, but maybe they need to be more visible. But you could have it sort of like where the flowers and the leaves creates kind of an interesting pattern here. I feel like that side needs a little bit of work.
I didn't know what to use for the English breakfast. Because it's like
Yeah.
a mix of like different type of breakfasts.
Yeah, I mean you have tea leaves, the actual leaf itself, maybe. Like before it's dry. They're dried, yeah, but you could have like actual leaves, like an actual tea leaf or something, maybe. All right. All right, very good. I'm sort of running out of time, so. So let's do Lara's next. It's supposed to be Bigelow, yeah. You're redesigning that. I tell you what, let's see how far you've got with this. So this font is it an Adobe font?
I believe so.
So it might just load, is it? Yeah, here it is. It's loading actually. Yeah, it's loaded now. Okay. I'm just going to turn off the spelling for a second. So, oh, this is really cute. I love that. That's really nice. This is kind of cool as well. I feel like this is a really little detail, but I feel like this gets too close to that sun. So I might put this one. I might move that one in a little bit further, just so that we have some space there. It just feels a bit awkward that it's like right on the edge, you know. And then I'm going to let you do it as this. I feel like you've gone too far.
I swear to the directions. I just be skipping
So on this one as well, I feel like this should come a bit lower. We need a little bit of space here.
And then I was thinking about scooting the bottom a little up, just because it's like kind of close to the end. I feel like I could be too close to the edges.
Yeah, I feel like it's all a little bit close to the edge here. This bit, you might make it a bit smaller perhaps, so that it can fit into that space. Do the horseshoes represent a particular number or something?
Normally those caffeine level things go by like 5. I just was messing with like whether to do filled in or different code for color or not.
Oh, okay. So this is the caffeine level. Oh, okay. That I might have it line up with this one, have it offset like that, so it lines up here. And then let's move that up a little bit also. So it's not quite so close to the edge. So actually, so it's this that needs to move actually.
Yeah, there's a lot of weird things happening.
I can get it. But overall, I think you've got some really nice stuff going on. Again, this is that thing with the runt again.
Yeah.
So like, see if you can work it so that we don't have that showing up. And then let's see, Remington Ace IT, Western Breakfast Black Tea.
Is this an actual brand?
The
I got excited and then I just
the other thing I might do is on this bit right here, is to distinguish it from some of this stuff that's here, is maybe go back to that color.
the orange.
Yeah,
The orange, there should be a sample of California's thing.
yeah, I got it.
And I think I messed with it after I submitted it to get some time.
Yeah.
I wasn't positive. I had switched to that bottom information part of the tea bags and everything to be a sans serif.
Oh,
And I didn't know if I should have kept it serif or if there was like much happening because of how small it would be.
yeah. Let me see. So do you remember what font you switched it to?
It was another Gothic. I think it was.
The
It was ALT for alternate
I have the last one with
188.
Yeah. Alt Gothic was it?
I think so, and I think I did the book.
Alt Gothic.
Yeah, I
But
think I did that.
this is the extra condensed. Was it a
It
condensed
wasn't
font?
an extra condense, it was that one for the book.
Okay.
And then, yeah, it was a little. And then I made it, I forget what size it is right there, I made it smaller. I made it to like 9, like 1 tick or something.
Yeah. Okay.
And then I fixed my.
I think I like it better like that actually.
Yeah, and then I just fixed the mix match of the lowercase t.
Yeah. So that should be low. So you changed it like that, did you?
I know I changed it to where it was all capital.
Oh, okay.
My lowercases to keep it with the all capital.
Yeah. I don't know. I think I prefer it like that. Yeah.
really close to the real thing.
So this is the front. This is the side.
Yeah.
Putting it
You can be
I
smaller.
feel like it needs something else. Like I feel like it's almost there, but it needs something else. Whether it's texture, or a pattern, or it needs pushing a little bit further. But it's pretty close.
I wasn't sure what to fill it with because originally I kind of just wanted the little like hat logo part of it to be on the side, giving some extra info. But I couldn't do the idea I was trying to do.
So you would this hat icon you would
Yeah.
without the cactus or
Without the little cactus in it. I was trying to do the hat with like maybe the information of like contact address and stuff like that. Just to put it
Yeah.
at the same time. But then I created the cactus guy, so maybe he can be smaller and scooted up and then the info below it or something. There's a little circle.
so originally you were thinking of having this with text, right?
Yeah. I just was like not positive of what text would be on the space.
Yeah. You could have so you've got it's a peak. You've got this story on this side, right? This is the back of the box,
Yeah.
or this? Yeah, that's the back. That's the side. Okay.
I could think what I was thinking for the side of the box in the back with that sun and cactus idea. Like my how to brew a tea, I can switch it to the larger side and then figure out what to put.
Oh, put this stuff onto this side, you mean,
Yeah, like the white
or
one.
on this side,
Yeah,
and then work out what's got part of that. Yeah.
just to feel smooth.
The other thing you've got to do as well, remember, is the top. So decide what needs to go on the top of it. It might just be the logo again.
Is there two artboards on this one, or is it just one?
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. I didn't see that.
I was
Sorry.
trying to figure out whether to do the logo again or if two or three.
Yeah. Okay. I feel like it's too repetitive to have it again on the bottom, and I think I would put the barcode on the bottom personally.
Not double.
Sorry.
They sometimes have it if it's front facing, it's on the back.
Yeah, it could be on the back. You could leave it there if you wanted to,
I'm okay with moving it. I just
but
make sure.
but
Twice, which is
there isn't really a rule as such as to where it should go. I just personally think that it works better for it to go on the bottom. It kind of hides it out of the way, and it doesn't really need to be a part of the visible design too much. You know, it just has to be there as a functional element that they can scan.
maybe you can repeat the cactus with a circle
This part.
on the and then put the hat at the bottom.
Like move this one up.
Yeah.
It's kind of an interesting idea. So you take this and put it up a bit. Let me hide this.
Also, everything's very I was trying to move it on there.
Yeah, sure. So I could put that, like, say there, and then there. So you're talking about this bit, right? So this would repeat. That's kind of interesting because it makes a symmetry with that other side, doesn't it? I think that these elements, I'm not sure. It looks a bit weird that this is sort of floating above that now to me.
I'm okay with getting better.
Yeah.
I like them. Well, I was thinking that like a full circle would be a lot.
Oh, full circle of that, yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
I'm just joking.
I think that was what you meant, right? This needs to go further, so.
Something happened there in the house. I was like,
Why can't I select that there?
if you're curious, for the other folders, I picked out a color scheme, and I was just gonna kind of alternate what is the primary and not primary. This one has orange, tan on the background,
Yeah.
and green,
Uh-huh.
and then I was just gonna kind of alternate it depending on the flavor. Like
Yeah.
a chai one, the orange is the main,
Uh-huh.
the tan is like more the front facing.
Oh, so you would still use the same three colors?
I think there's four. They're a little to the left. There's like a blue, a green. That's the first color. But
These ones here.
there's like a
Oh,
blue
yeah, yeah.
and I was gonna-
This one you're not using here, though, are you?
No, not on this one.
Uh-huh.
So one of the flavors would just be. It's still incorporated. There will always be a common color.
Yeah, okay. That's kind of an interesting idea. So you'd have the same colors being utilized all the time, which keeps the set kind of feeling like they belong together. Okay, that's kind of interesting. All right, cool. This is looking really good. It's a shame you got the wrong thing, but I'll let it off you this time. I'm feeling generous.
If you really wanted, I could just start replacing everything with the word for it.
But keep the Western theme. All right, very good. So I've got, we've still got to do a Youngins project, right? We're at 3:20, so this is going to be a little bit quick. I don't think I'm going to do another group for critique, so we'll have to wait till next week. I might have to refresh this. This is a very different look. What does it say? Shizuoka green tea? So are you also doing like a different brand? Are you still doing Bigelow?
I think so. I just didn't like do that much research on like the other companies, so like I don't know if it already exists. But yeah, I think it's my vision.
So you're making a new brand? As you haven't got so far with this one, I think I'm going to have you try to fit it. Could you fit it with Bigelow? Could you do the Bigelow? Or is this Shizuoka? This is the name of the brand, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I really like some of the illustrative stuff that you've got going on, like this part right here, and the bamboo and so on. It's looking really good. You've obviously still got quite a bit to do in terms of like adding the text and stuff onto it, but you've got to start to it. I would see if you could, because the real project is to like design the packaging for Bigelow. So as you haven't got that far with it yet, I think I'm going to have you try to design it to the Bigelow package. Okay. All right. If you want to try doing one like this, like extend it all the way out as a separate brand, by all means do it. But I think it'd be good to try and stick to the Bigelow brand. All right. All right, we're about out of time. We've got about 8 minutes left, so I don't think I'm going to do another critique. For anybody that's still here that was going to be in another group, we'll try to do that next week, okay?
And like we read the project, and then I was basing it off of the examples we were given in class. And I felt like, oh, these are just great examples. Like, it was a great company to use for it.
Yeah.
The same thing as Laura.
You did a different brand.
Yeah, I wanted to take a look at
Yeah,
it.
sure.
I guess right now we've got 7 minutes.
I mean, I really like the photo. I thought I could change it to Bigelow and like do a play on like the traditional
Yeah.
style that was version.
So what if this is
I really like it.
I saw it.
Maybe it's like a sub.
That's what I was thinking. Okay. Okay, I'll try that.
Maybe keep this as a special brand.
There, I looked into it. They said like 7.
Is that
Right. You're right.
It looks like they're
There's
more.
one They lied to me. Yeah. Google lied to me. I know. I did. I looked it up. I did look it up. Okay. I'll do that now. Great. But so far, yeah.
I don't know. It might have been me too. It might have been me too.
Yeah.
In the middle.
Yeah.
Because I can Google it. 7 plus pedals. Okay.
Oh, it's in plus.
Plus. Okay.
Because otherwise it looks like a